So for those of you who haven't heard of us, which I'm sure is most, we are a community group which we've set up as a community benefit society to take over a running track and playing fields that was at risk of falling off the Cornwall Council's estate of leisure facilities 4 years ago. Could we have the next slide, please? So this presentation, I suppose, will be relevant to some people more than others. There are things about this example that will apply in some situations and things that won't apply in others. And we're very conscious of the fact that while it's taken a number of years and a considerable amount of hard work from an ever-growing number of volunteers, I think it would not have been possible had certain kind of important conditions not been met. And the circumstances that we found ourselves in really made the difference, I think, between success and failure. So there are things I think that we have learned, that we have done, that we haven't done, that can be relevant. But there are definitely things that, had we not, for example, found ourselves with the asset as it was, and the fact that while this generally this conversation is around parks, Power Track is a combination really of a park and a leisure centre. Although calling it a leisure centre, I think was probably over-egging it a bit. But there's a running track. There are football pitches. There are, I suppose there are football pitches is a common thing in parks. Running tracks possibly not. But the defining feature, I guess, of this site, and the reason that the community got involved was because the kind of the saleable part, I suppose, of the site, the running track and the football pitches, were not, and a small building for changing facilities, were not attractive to the commercial operators who were looking at the kind of estate of leisure centres as a whole. So it didn't have a sports hall. There's no gym, no swimming pool, none of the basic infrastructure that makes a leisure centre and makes them interesting to sort of commercial operators who have developed, who know and have developed over time a method of kind of operating them, at least, if not profitably, at least not loss making. So this site was more attractive to housing developers than it was to commercial leisure centre operators. And that kind of provoked a sense of fear in the community, certainly, that it's a kind of green space right in the heart of three communities that all sort of meet on the edges of this site, which finds itself right in the middle. I guess the other defining feature was that we seemed naturally to form a community group that kind of came out of this, seemed to be both very well connected in that we had two, at that time, sitting Cornwall councillors among our group. Both kind of unfortunately lost their seats the following council elections. But so the group that came together was very well connected and was very broadly representative of the kind of stakeholders of the site as a whole. Now, I'm wary of using the word representative because in some of the conversations that have been had through the course of this Nesta project, through which I definitely have learned a lot, the kind of issue of representation has come up, and I think there are definitely ways in which our group could be seen as quite homogenous, I suppose. But in terms of representing the various different kind of parts of the community who use the site for different reasons, there were people there who who just walk their dogs there. There are people there who played football there. There are people in this group who were heavily involved with the athletics club and had been for years. So it was usefully representative, and I think the connections can't be sort of undersold. We did have a very supportive council, and I think that is key. Quite possibly, without the kind of expertise from the members of the group, the relevant members of the group, we might not have found the council to be quite so supportive. So, where the kind of balance of importance lies there is hard to say. But we were very lucky in that the relationship with the council from the very beginning was very positive. They were worried about the kind of public backlash for selling a key green space for development. They were very keen to be presented with a feasible and attractive plan to do something else, and we as a group had the capacity to come up with that plan, I think. Next slide, please. So I suppose the kind of one of the key lessons that we have taken from this is that plans are really crucial, and nobody's going to give you the time of day without one, and without a sort of a thorough and defensible one. But you have to be adaptable, and I think that's been demonstrated just in this. So the picture that you can see is the kind of mock-up that we did of the site as a whole. We had drones flying overhead, taking photographs, put all together into a kind of big aerial view, and then some very friendly and supportive local designers kind of imagined visually what we had come up with as the various potentials for the site. So, there you can see that's an artificial 4G football pitch. There's a pavilion made out of repurposed shipping containers, kids' play area, and one part of the running track. Now, some of that has happened. The pavilion's been redone. There is no 4G pitch. The play park is in place. But we had an idea of the sequencing, and the circumstances were such that we had to reevaluate the idea of that sequencing, and it's hard to say whether that's been for the better or for the worse. In some sense, it's just that's the hand we were dealt, and that's the circumstances we found ourselves in. We were very lucky in that there was capital funding available to redevelop the pavilion. We've definitely found that, Nesta aside, it's much easier to secure funding for capital developments than it is for operations, and so the plans needed to be sort of altered accordingly to take advantage of what was available, and so I think this kind of very simple flow of what we had imagined that was going to happen, taking over control of the site, increasing the level of operations that were going on. We have planned a community share offer, followed then by trying to put into place some of the development ideas that we have, leading ultimately to survival. And the reality was different in that we started taking over the site before we had any legal control over it, which was slightly daunting, but that was just the way in which the varying speeds between the commercial operator who had been holding control of it until such time as something was decided, and the way in which the council arrangements for coming up with a lease, they operated at different speeds, and we just had to sort of fit in there as we could. But then money became available for the building, and we realized that in fact we would be much better able to come up with the kind of commercial justification for the site if we had more facilities on which to sort of base the kind of the services and activities that can make this a viable proposition. the community share offer is still in limbo, much like a lot's in limbo right now. But I think we're waiting really for circumstances to sort of allow that kind of public gathering again, which I think would greatly enhance our chances of a successful community share offer. So flexibility in terms of timing without really losing the vision, I guess, is important. Next slide, please.
Okay, just to tell you that's 10 minutes, okay.
I'm very sorry, I've clearly slowed down too much. So this picture is just an example of, we'll go on to the next slide and I'll go through it, but this is, cycling on the track is something that was not done before, was a great source of worry, I suppose, to the conventional users of the site. So, and it's a kind of emblematic, in my view, of what we've done, in that, these hopefully are the things that are applicable to everybody and not specific to our site. But we definitely realized we needed to diversify what was going on and make sure that there was something available for the kind of wide range of people in the community who could become the customer base and ultimately the sort of the providers of the resources that will help us to survive. And the second one is that we were a very small group. You need to ask for help, but then you need to be able to make sure that you can use it. And we did very well at the first part of that, and we're only now coming to figure out the second part of that there's something fundamentally frustrating for volunteers who are interested and don't find a kind of a route into contributing that enthusiasm that they have. So the third one, and I think this has been very useful from the very beginning. Some of us had experience in kind of business planning, and were able to be quite explicit about what the benefits in various different ways of this undertaking would be, spelling out very clearly to whom those benefits would sort of accrue, and then going and trying to motivate those people who would be receiving the benefits to participate in the process. So, we've got a very good social prescribing program that's going from strength to strength, and that's been really about convincing the local health centre that they will benefit from being able to give a better option to some of their patients, which will see better outcomes for the patients than they've been getting with the conventional kind of route, and we'll see much less call on the health centre's resources as those individuals are sort of kind of moving into better health through kind of lifestyle, nutrition advice, and opportunities for fitness. So another lesson, I think, is that it's hard to see us surviving as a private business operating a small leisure facility. I think we're a community business, and it's the combination of those two things, the community nature and the facilities that we have and the services we offer, that will allow us to survive. And so that means that we have to be open, and we have to be kind of welcoming of all the various different elements of the community, and figure out ways in which we can help other people do what they seek to achieve as well, and that in turn strengthens the community, and that's how we prosper, us and the community more widely. And the last one, I guess, and the reason there is no check mark is because the jury's still out, I suppose, but there's a real balance to be struck between sorting out the real fine granular details of how a business runs, whether the pricing is right, whether the communication with your customers is right, and being able to not be so buried in those details that you lose sight of what the overall objective is, what the opportunities that may be available coming down the line are, and making sure that you're maintaining the kind of the networks that allow those things to sort of to come to you and allow you to be ready for those things. And that's that's an ongoing process, but I think it's one that the organization needs to be set up in such a way that there are people who concentrate on each of those things, and there's good communication between them, because it's very easy to be so concentrated on the horizon that the details really, and the details are where the difference is made. The details get lost, and it's equally, and I've found this myself, it's equally easy to be it's so buried in the day-to-day particulars of running a kind of a fledgling business that you haven't spent the time needed on the sort of strategy side of it. So that, I hope, is useful to circumstances other than those exactly like ours. But we're very happy to share what lessons we have learned, and hopefully continue to do so. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Colin. If it's okay, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions now,
Yeah,
and then
certainly.
I realise you have to go in 10 minutes. Great. So, Colin, you mentioned stuff about the social prescribing elements of that. Can you talk a bit about how that started? Because this is a bit of a holy grail for lots of people looking at this sort of stuff.
Yeah, certainly. So it was started in part because we have a doctor's surgery co-located. So on the edge of our park there is the community's health center. So that there's a natural connection. The car parks are shared. Many people who come down to the doctor's surgery will then go for a walk, conventionally go for a walk on the site. So there's a connection in people's minds. There was a clear connection in our mind as far as when we were identifying all of our stakeholders, they were at the top of the list. And it really got going because of the interest that Nesta showed in that idea. So there are obvious the kind of intangible benefits of having a park and a green space are you can most easily see them being made tangible by the health benefits that people would receive from spending more time doing that kind of thing and having opportunities for exercise. So
Yeah,
that was.
The evidence is pretty clear on all of that stuff. I guess it's about how you actually manage to convince someone to give you, I don't know, 3 or 4 grand a year, or have some sort of contract that gives you a income on that.
So the first 18 months was funded by the Nesta project, and it was only 3 months ago really that the relationship has been sort of building, and I think even through COVID it was strengthened by our kind of willingness to make any part of our site available to the doctor's surgery, for any of their sort of urgent needs. But they were basically convinced by the outputs really that we had that kind of visionary investment from Nesta to sort of pilot this project, and the results were such that the health center said, we see a benefit in this, and we would like to convince our kind of local commissioning group to put some of that money towards carrying this project on. So I don't think we did anything dramatic to convince them, because there was no risk, there was no financial risk for the NHS and the Doctors' Centre at first. We funded it because Nesta funded us to do it, and that was invaluable. I think without that, they've got so many demands on their resources that, with the evidence that this had worked for 18 months, it was a very easy conversation to have. Without that evidence, it would have been a very difficult conversation to have. So hopefully that evidence that we've produced can be used by other people to show, this can work. It's worked in other places. And it's a cost-saving measure for the NHS.
Yeah, that sounds well. And actually, that's an example of what you were talking about earlier about the mix between capital funding and revenue, where capital and investment upfront for Nesta in this case can help you build some sort of revenue funding for it longer term. I wonder if you could just talk about, you mentioned about the clash of users of the place, in particular with your sort of community ownership model of the site. You mentioned the clash between cyclists and others, but I'm sure there's lots of others, about people who want to use the site in different ways, or think that it should be owned and managed in a certain way. What sort of methods or levers have you got or used, or tips that you could share for others about how to manage that sort of segment clash?
Yeah, I mean, this, I guess, is in some ways it is the kind of long-term, it's the long-term objective of the whole, taking aside the, the fact that we want to be providing facilities and services for healthy living for this community, which is a major objective. The other major objective, and really the reason that I kind of became involved with this in the first place, is because this is it's part of that sort of ongoing need, I think, to be able to convince communities of their own ability, the need and the ability to sort of manage their own resources and collectively take control of more of our lives. And often people are afraid of change, particularly when change has traditionally, at least in memory, been a negative thing. People were used to having these facilities provided, they're council facilities. Nobody had any relationship with the cost of operation, and they were very used to how things were. And I think we had to be very transparent with the range of stakeholders about, the threat is real. So on the one hand, I'm very wary of using kind of fear as a motivation ever, but the threat of this being sold for development was a real one. And I think once people recognized that the status quo wasn't an option, we can sit around the table, we can decide what are our options, how do we want to proceed. You have very quickly to get people to agree to take off the table the status quo, because that was being taken off the table, not by us, but so that takes it's easier for some people to absorb than others, and it remains the case that there are some of the people who have been using this in the Athletic Club paying an access fee doesn't go anywhere near the operating cost of the site, don't really understand why this site has been sort of taken over in some ways by a whole range of other things. I think those people that are sort of shrinking in number as more and more people are recognizing that, we have an athletics facility because we have all of these other things going on too. Without those other things, then the numbers didn't match up. So transparency is key. You have to make sure that people understand what the reality of the financial situation is, and again, without sort of going too far into sort of fear mongering. But I think people feel involved if they're given the information that allows them to make sort of their own decisions on things. And I think we've done very well at trying to bring as many people into the kind of the difficulties of the choices that have to be made, and find that when people have that kind of access to the information, they think, well, we're clearly not making money out of this. It's not as though this is some sort of a sort of profit-making enterprise. This is a community venture, and everything is plowed back into investing in the site. And then everybody realizes that if we can't carry on as we were, we have to come up with some sort of new model. And then the obvious way of doing that is for everybody to have an equal voice in coming up with a sort of as fair a solution as possible. And that means, going through the calendar and sort of it's weekday evenings through the winter that everybody wants the floodlights, be that on the track, be that in the field, the pitch in the middle. So we have to basically share it out. There's time for kid football training as there is for athletics training, as there is for cyclists. And once people recognize that fairness is the basis of that, and that the group doing it is as transparent as could be expected, it gets an easier conversation to have.
We're blessed in this country to have a fantastic and growing grassroots movement of local Friends of Parks groups, around about 7,000 so far. That's grown up over the last 20 years. Each Friends group is independent, has its own circumstances, its own history, its own issues. But as a movement, it's making a real difference to green spaces across the UK. The forums, groups have formed forums in many towns and areas across the country where they can share experiences and good practice and also work together to be a collective voice. And there's some examples on the screen from around the country. Nationally, we're coordinated through the National Federation of Parks and Green Spaces. And that's also been able to raise the profile of friends groups significantly, have a seat at all the relevant tables where national discussions and decision making is being made, to be sure that the voices of the public are being heard at every level. So next slide. Oh yeah, before we move to the next slide, just as an example, at the top on the right there you have a slide from my local park in 2007, when we were calling for the regeneration of a very neglected and underused space which is in the centre of Tottenham. We've successfully done that. We've built a new community centre which we run, and you can see at the bottom a slide from a national meeting of government departments and national green space organisations, an all-day meeting to discuss the future of green spaces and how we can all collaborate together. So that's the journey we've taken in Lordship Rec. Next slide, please. Paul. Paul's doing this slide, yeah?
I'm going to start again. So friends add a lot of value and benefits, and at Parks Community UK, we think of these benefits as being for green spaces, for communities, for green space managers, and for individuals. When it's working well, the relationship between friends of parks groups and green space managers is very complementary, with friends offering activities, more activities, better maintenance, a means for local people to become involved in their park, and feedback from on the ground to the managers about issues such as antisocial behaviour, as well as offering benefits at the individual level for those people who become involved with the friends group. So perhaps as an example of this, one of our pilot sites has been able to work really closely with its different user groups, where previously there was conflict between the user groups, to the extent that they were telling me only 2 weeks ago that local dog walkers now walk the football pitches before junior football league games take place and remove all the dog poo.
Next slide, please. So I think it's important to be ambitious, but actually it's really just common sense that we need a friends group, whatever they call themselves, a community group dedicated to each public green space across the country. There's 27,000 of those. So there's lots of room for growth. Also, each area needs a forum where groups are networking and sharing experiences and working together and working in partnership with their management, local authorities. Also, importantly, that groups need to become stronger and more effective, have higher membership, more activities, become more diverse, more representative, and more empowered. So there's a whole job to be done in uplifting the effectivity across the whole of the UK of community involvement. Yeah, the relationships with management, or between management and community, need to be nurtured and built. They're not something that just happens overnight, and they should be based on mutual understanding and common goals. And it's what unites us that really brings us together and creates a good partnership. And that will be a win-win situation for everybody involved. Next slide, please.
So with over 7,000 friends groups within the UK, we've had to really scale our efforts, you know, in order to try and make the most impact from the funding given to us by Nesta. So the approach that we've taken is to work with 10 pilot sites and to really develop and spread the benefits of friends groups activities via our website and our Twitter account as a platform for sharing digital learning across all friends group movement. So as part of that, you can find on the website case studies and good practice guides and model documents and links to other organisations, as well as a very helpful organisational strength checker tool called Better Friends. So as we move forward, we want to be able to build on this in helping groups to become stronger and more effective. And very much a part of this is as well helping groups to work more effectively with green space managers. In our next phase, we particularly want to focus on facilitating peer learning amongst groups, so supporting each other by sharing good practice, you know, and positive experiences of what works. We're also looking at the moment to develop an app that will help groups to more easily capture and report on all that they do, and also to help groups to involve a wider cross-section of the community in their work. And of course, we'll always campaign for more resources for parks and for them to be protected. Next slide.
This is over to me, I think. So thanks for giving me the chance to speak as part of Rethinking Future Parks. My name's Gill. I'm a member of Friends of Thorne Moss, and I was also recruited this year to help on the Parks community team as a comms manager, so helping write content for the website, promote it, and also run the Twitter account, which I started in January. So hopefully it gives me a unique insight into the viewpoint from being on a friends group, and B, how Parks community has helped and can still help friends groups. So to begin the story of Friends of Thorne Moss, we go back to January 2018. David versus Goliath battle, because my local green space, Thorne Moss, 39 hectares of playing fields, 15 local pitches for football teams, 8 hectares of woodland, massively popular space right on the border of Stretford in Trafford and Chorlton, which is in Manchester, so right on the border of 2 areas of Greater Manchester. Planning permission was sought, a joint application from Salford City FC and Trafford. Salford City FC mostly owned by Gary Neville and a lot of his ex-football mates from when they came through UA92. And the result of it would have been to lose a substantial portion of the green space, and it would be fenced off from access, so it would mean moving public rights of way. It was a big deal, and the way that it was handled was almost as a done deal, you know, as you often hear when it's local spaces under threat, trying to nullify any protests. But I think they were surprised at the strength of feeling, because although when you look on a map, the area's got a lot of green space, a lot of it is golf courses. There's like 4, all one after the other along the River Mersey. So Thorne Moss is actually the biggest substantial bit of green space for 2 very, very big neighbouring communities. And people, you know, throughout their lives and previous generations have used the space. So it Yeah, it was a surprise, I think, to Salford City FC and the council, the strength of feeling to mount a campaign and protest that there were better sites for the club to go to. They wanted to build a HQ there, and obviously with the fencing off of the area, build practice pitches. So it would have been used throughout the day and at the weekends as well. It would have pushed the local teams' pitches onto the worst area of the site. If you look at the photo there, you can see it's a fantastic big green space, but it's actually a floodplain as well. So it serves another purpose on wetter times of the year. And the plans would have moved the local pitches onto the wetter bit of the green space. So it would have impacted on sort of local football as well. Of course, they tried to sell it that, you know, they'd improve all the pitches and that the teams would be able to use the Salford City facilities. But when that's happened in other areas of the country, then usually that peters out and it's kind of a token effort. So that galvanised the local communities, the two areas of Stretford and Chorlton. And for the first time ever in my life, I got involved in a campaign. I'm not an activist. But I care passionately about this green space, and I'd taken it for granted, really. And now it was under threat, and I felt, you know, other people, local people felt exactly the same. We got together and we managed to get 1,850 objections written to the planning application, which is the biggest that Trafford has ever had in their history. As it happened, local politics helped us out, which echoes what Colin said in his talk about Partrack. We were very lucky. It had been a Tory-run council in Trafford, and they had been there for over a decade, so they felt in a strong position. But there was Turnmoss and there was another site which they wanted to sell off green space, which kind of brought out a lot of people to really think about their local politics and who they were going to vote for. And it tipped the balance. It was one of the few councils, I think the only council, major council, to switch to Labour in those elections of May 2018. So it didn't actually go to planning. It would have been touch and go, even with all the campaign that we'd run and the number of objections. You just never know when a planning committee sits. But luckily, it was a divided council, but the Greens, Liberal Democrats and Labour pooled together and pulled the planning application, so it got taken away. So we were having mounted the campaign thinking, okay, right, brilliant, now what do we do? We need to form a friends group. We need to galvanise and think, how can we protect this space for future generations, and how can we improve the pitches for the players? How can we enhance this wonderful resource that, to be honest, had been run down by Trafford Council as the Tories had allocated money to the borough. Turnmoss had been sadly neglected and the changing rooms were in a terrible state. So that led me one night to be looking on the internet thinking, okay, how do you set up a friends group? What do you do? And I happened to come across the Rethinking Parks Nesta page. And I was seeing there examples of people who'd done exactly what we needed to do. And it was like manna from heaven, fantastic. So I fired off an email, which Dave picked up, I think, because of his connection at Lordship Rec and the fact that they were the heading up the Parks Community UK project. And he came back and he said, well, we're getting 10 pilot sites together. We think we've got them all, to be honest, but you know, you've got such a compelling case and it's such a perfect time to come on board with the project that we squeezed in as the northernmost pilot group of the lot. And since then, it's just been fantastic, really. on so many levels. I'll kind of move on to how it's helped. But first of all, it focused our minds. We got a questionnaire we had to fill in, which was quite daunting. But it asked things like site type, structure, members, what type of park users do you have? Does an income come in? How welcoming is the site? Absolutely brilliant things for us as a group to have to sit down and discuss. Gets you to think about who are the people meant to be maintaining the site. You know, we're total rookies with no idea really who maintains it, how often they do. So having Parks Community there and sort of prompting us and helping us really was fantastic at that early stage. It helped us make decisions. It helped us understand about partnership working. Then we went on when we were allowed out and we could meet together, Lordship Rec Parks Community hosted a get-together of all the pilot sites. And that was absolutely fantastic because, you know, you've got to see other groups, some of whom are very well established, get to take a look at the Lordship Rec site, and the guys there obviously well ahead of the curve in terms of what you can achieve, being able to see the hub, you know, the community hub, the cafe, the way they built it out of sort of sustainable materials using straw bale, multi-use spaces, which type of users they were helping. And then meeting the other groups as well and seeing their issues, their problems, the ways that they'd found solutions. It was inspiring, you know, the energy after we'd come away from that. We were absolutely buzzing. We got the train back from Euston to Manchester, and we were just firing off ideas, having seen what was possible, and also the fact that people were just like us as well, you know, volunteers who'd learned so much along the way that we thought having this group with these sort of pilot sites alongside us and the mentorship of Parks Community UK is exactly what we need. After that, it was seeing how other parks had tackled issues. So we'd never heard of a user forum, for example. And one of the pilot sites, well, I mean, Lordship Rec have a fantastic one, but a couple of the other pilot sites did as well. So that got us thinking, actually, that's what we need to do. As Colin said in his talk, it's about listening to all the users of the site, seeing what people can bring to the table in terms of volunteer hours to help. But what are the different needs and what are the possibilities as well? Because we've got a few disused buildings on the site. So it is about being helpful with the council. It's all about that partnership working. And the fact that we had Lordship Rec there as an example of how much money they'd brought in terms of funding, it absolutely opened the eyes of our council, Trafford Council, as to what was possible. They pretty much just earmarked Turn Moss as playing fields and nothing else. And yet we did as part of the campaign, we found out who was actually using it and why they used it. And the football aspect, I think, this is off the top of my head, it might be wrong, but it was something like 15%. You know, you'd think it would be like 90%, 95%, the way that the council were thinking about it. And that's not to be dismissive of that aspect at all, because you know, traditionally it's been used for that purpose, and it's fantastic for what it does. But actually, a lot of people went there just to relax. You know, it's a free thing you can do with your friends, your family, health reasons, you know, nature. So lots of other things that the council really were quite blind to, which is astonishing when you look at the photo and you see the site. I mean, it's one of the few open areas in the whole of sort of Trafford and that area of Manchester, which is open. You can see the skies, you know. So it's a different space to the municipal parks that we do have fairly close by. So it gets you to think about the site and what you can do with it. One of the other pilot schemes was Duke's Meadows. There was another one which is Meadow Orchard, so they'd had an orchard on the site. So this year we planted an orchard, you know, a little area of the site that's not used for football. It won't impact on them. But we worked with the new RHS Bridgewater just down the road in Worsley and got heritage varieties of trees in just before lockdown, thank goodness. So the benefits of Parks Community UK involvement has just been tremendous for us. It's opened up the networks, it's helped us find solutions, it's been a safety net. Because at the end of the day, we're all volunteers, you know, on a community group or a friends group, and you need to find quick solutions and not waste that time that people have given up to help with their green space. And it meant the council took notice of us because they saw what other pilot sites had done. Obviously, they're on tight budgets, so they want to see impressive track records that other people have delivered, successes, and funding being a big one. And there's funding that we as a friends group have access to that the council can't get. So it's working as a partner. I think it changed that. Obviously, we'd been the enemy for the previous council because they wanted to change the site and work with a development partner. But now this new council saw, actually, we've got the community on board. They've got some fantastic ideas. They've got some great backing with Parks Community UK and other pilot sites that have delivered for their communities and neighbourhoods. So they treated us as a partner rather than the enemy or somebody to be afraid of. And it's then, from that point, you can work together. Last year, they announced £375,000 investment in Thorne Moss. And I think next month they're going to start work on refurbishing the changing rooms and also pitch improvements as well. So it's actual real backup that I think, having formed the Friends of Thorne Moss and having the backing of Parks Community UK, has delivered, it will deliver improvements for the whole area. And it can get better than that as well, because we've got plans for the disused buildings to perhaps bring a community hub in or a cafe or have one of the buildings as a multi-purpose space, you know, that different aspects of the community can use. The next stage is to do a consultation once life gets a bit more back to normal, and we can hear what the community actually feel about plans and what their priorities are. So it's really about learning to work together and build trust so that we can kind of hear other stories and other people inspire us, and we use that in our particular situation. Parks Community's helped with tiny issues. You know, someone on Twitter asked about who's a good bank account we can go with because we're struggling to find one. You know, you could waste a whole evening trying to sort that out. And if you're on limited time, you can only, you know, give a couple of hours a week to help the friends group. Then things like that matter. You know, you can just go on Twitter and ask other groups, okay, you know, we want to plant an orchard. You know, what help did you get? You know, did any other groups work with you on it, for example? During lockdown, it was fantastic because obviously, you know, we'd sort of trundled along and progressed nicely, and then it hit a bit of a shuddering stop. We just got the orchard in, and then it's like, well, okay, we can't even do any sessions together anymore. We can't meet. And Parks Community stepped up there with a fantastic post that just showed what lots of the friends groups have been doing, you know, through March, April. And there was actually plenty you could do remotely in order to help the community. So some of them did remote walkarounds, you know, when people weren't allowed out. Some people were shielding. They could tune in and then, you know, have a sort of live commentary of a particular green space, and people felt like at least they'd got a connection with nature. And there was just so many more different green spaces. You know, a lot of the bigger green spaces got overwhelmed with visitors. So Love Leeds Park, they did a green space map which showed lots of the smaller spaces as well as the bigger spaces. You don't all have to go to those popular spots. There's other ones too. So it's just thinking outside the box, and I think sometimes you need other people to lead the way on that. And then once you're off, you're up and running, you can think, yes, you know, this worked really, really well. So in terms of the future, we're hoping, you know, the parks community will be able to help perhaps upskill us, you know, so we can learn some good tools to be able to digitally communicate better. Hoping maybe something like online digital learning on different subjects, people being able to share their stories if they do, you know, sort of little video blogs or something that could go on the site dealing with different issues. So, you know, it's kind of endless, really, the possibilities, I think. To finish
Great.
off, it's the conclusion is how can we ensure a healthy future for our parks? And I think the example that we've found is no one size fits all. Certainly, you need quite a lot of examples to be able to see what might work for you. Friends groups have to be part of the solution because it's connected community. You know, these people know what the space is great for being used for, and that's many different uses. And they want to help, you know, so it's tapping into that really and making sure that people feel part of the solution. And I think the friends groups fitting that in with the other stakeholders and the council is key. Any solutions sort of bringing money in on the site, personally, I wouldn't want it to be too in your face, because part of the joy of visiting Turn Moss Fields, for example, is just that escape, you know, back to nature and away from commercialism. So friends groups, you know, they often will have like a sort of fair to raise money, you know, so that it sort of funds some of the activities through the year. Things like that, I think people will accept as long as it's managed. And I know some of the London parks, you know, are pushing events more and more, and I wonder whether it's going over too far, that people are actually having too much restricted access. So it's about managing it, isn't it, and finding a balance and using the resources sensitively as well. So it's about thinking outside the box. Colin talked about social prescribing, and that's certainly got to be something that parks can help find solutions with. And it's seeing it as a resource, but using it with respect, so that it enhances the offering for all the users.
Well, thanks, Gill. I'm going to have to stop you there because we are
Yep.
well over time. If you can just stop sharing your video 1 second,
Yep.
I will just ask you a couple of questions, and then I think we'll bring this to a close, if that's okay. Gill, I didn't want to stop you there at all, because that was some really brilliant stuff in there, and actually that case study of you know, just the real life experiences of what it means in a place at a particular time. I think there's some brilliant stuff in there, so thank you for that.
Sorry if I went on.
No, I know, I can feel your passion. I'm just some people need to go. So yes. So Paul, I wonder if you could just talk us through quickly about your what was it called? Your Better Friends health check tool. What exactly is that for, and how does it work?
It's a diagnostic tool that will help a friends group to think about and you know, really rate themselves in terms of how they function. You know, so it has different elements to it, such as, for instance, you know, the governance element, you know, how they govern themselves, how they involve people from the wider community, their involvement with other stakeholders and how effective that is, their involvement, as I say, of, you know, perhaps different sections of the community. So it's divided up into 5 different sections, and having completed it as a group, ideally, you then get a report pretty much instantaneously, which both gives you, you know, lots of really useful feedback, a score, and what we found is that it's based on the feedback, is it's terribly useful for groups to actually think about how you operate, all the different aspects and elements that go into, making up, your group and what you do and how you do. So a really great learning tool. It's based upon tools like the resilient health checker that Heritage Lottery Fund have got, and also a tool that Big Lottery have developed. But we think ours is bigger and better because we actually think that it gives a much more rounded and much more sort of sensitive feedback to groups. So we highly recommend it, for groups that would like to, improve.
Great stuff. Thank you. And quite a lot of what you have talked about is about the relationship between council officers and the friends of groups. So I wondered if you had some top tips on how to make that relationship as strong as possible and to keep it strong.
Always try and be positive and constructive. I think, as with any relationship, that if you're able to, continue to look for the best in the relationship rather than dwell on the worst, you, in the long term, will do a lot better. Our experience has certainly been that that groups where conflict has started to become too much a part of the relationship, tend to ground to a halt. The ones that, even in the difficult times, are able to, see to the future, will find that that would be the top tip, I think, Casey.
Great, thank you, Paul. And Dave, just before you go, I was interested in what you're hopeful about. You set out quite a big stall there for 27,000 funds of groups across the UK. That sounds like a pretty ambitious call to arms. What are you hopeful about over the next year, over the next 3 years?
The UK. Well, let's think about the world. Parks and public green spaces are a key part of any community, and the community kind of taking ownership of those spaces, moral ownership, and being actively involved and in all the decisions is important for that green space, but it's important for that community too. That communities are not just passive receivers of services, but they're actively involved in not just making the decisions, but organising events, animating those sites, publicising, promoting, championing them, protecting them, and so on. And I think that the key is really building up a really good partnership with those that are tasked with managing the sites. So the first step is to have an active group in every site, but that's just the beginning. As Gill has explained for Turn Moss, Friends of Turn Moss, that's the beginning of a long road of activities and involvement and experiences and partnership working, and really transforming green spaces into as good as they can be, with as much community involvement as can be created. There's no template that people can just automatically click their fingers and it happens. It's a process, it's a learning curve, and it's been very exciting for me to start a group 20 years ago from my local park, and now I'm chair of a national federation of thousands of groups. So yeah, let's think big.
Great stuff. And any other messages of hope for everyone out there before we finish?
I think it's the time feels like now for green spaces because of what's happened with COVID and the pandemic and lockdowns. I think it's forced people's minds, you know, to realise how much they need these spaces. And certainly I was guilty of taking mine for granted until the threat of it being taken away came along. I think now with COVID, the fact that it's been vital that people have had decent green spaces to escape from. There's just been so many reports coming out, you know, each day there's a new report, and it's the evidence is utterly overwhelming, and now people have the experiences to back it up. But I hope the next stage will be, you know, support on a higher level. You know, there's got to be better financial support, I think, for our green spaces, because, as Dave said, they can deliver even more. And it's time that people are saying we need these spaces, and they have to be protected going into the future. And also, we need more of them, because you've got the social inequality that's been highlighted this year. That a lot of people don't even have a green space within 10-minute walk from them. You know, that's got to be essential for people's mental and physical health. So I a tipping point.
Colin, any last words from you?
Well, I mean, I would echo what Gill said, and I think another reason for being hopeful, I guess, is that, you know, there's the growing recognition of the importance of parks and the ways in which they have really tangible benefits for people, and there's also, I think, you know, this kind of process is showing that there's a lot of resources out there to make it easier for people to take those kind of next steps. To, you know, there's a wealth of information that's being shared by lots of your, you know, your groups, all of you, on how people can organize, what they can, what kind of lessons have already been learned. You know, it's always much easier to learn from somebody else's mistakes, and shortens the time required to sort of make a real difference in the community. So it's been invaluable for us, and I'm sure it will continue to be invaluable for lots of other people.
Great. Well, lovely. Thank you for taking the time this morning to talk us through your projects. Lots of key learning there about how this stuff happens, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Lots of stuff about capital funding, about revenue funding, about user groups, about the representation of this, but also about how often these things start in conflict and then evolve into something else. So food for thought for lots of people. Thank you very much.
My name's John Thorne. I'm the project manager for the Parks to Health projects, which covers Camden and Islington in north and central London. And I'm going to be talking about the Rethinking community involvement and participation in regard to green and social prescribing. Chris, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So what you have on this slide is what we're aiming for in regard to our vision. What we really want to do with our parks, and we have about 150 parks across the two boroughs, mainly very small parks, but that's the number we have. We're really keen that our parks should be part of the public health agenda. And so we have a very strong link with public health, the NHS, with GPs, social prescribing link workers, with mental health trusts, so that our parks are used by people to improve their health. Now we know, and the proof is there, that parks benefit people's health. And if there's one statistic that really stands out, is the first one, the first bullet point there, that 2 hours or more a week in a park, either in one visit or multiple visits across a week, improve your mental well-being. As simple as that. Remembering, of course, parks are free, they're accessible, there's going to be one near to almost everybody. That's a great offer, a great unique selling point for parks. We also know that parks can help to reduce obesity, diabetes and heart disease, which obviously are major killers or really affects a lot of people's health in this country. And they help with people with dementia. Dementia is actually the biggest killer in England. And also parks can increase levels of physical activity. And physical activity has a huge number of benefits. It's not just being active for its own sake, but a huge number of benefits in regard to people's health. So parks are uniquely placed to improve people's health, and we really want to capitalise on that. So in our vision of making parks public health assets, what we want to do is to increase people's physical activity levels, improve their mental health and well-being, increase social cohesion, and reduce socialisation and loneliness. So, as of almost a year ago now, last November, we started a green social prescribing pilot, which lasted initially, it's in 2 phases really, initially from six months to May this year, and then has carried on in other form as well. And it's partly funded by us, by the Parks and Health Project, and it's partly funded by DEFRA. And what we want to do is to do what we've been doing is a really specific piece of work around parks in regard to social prescribing, where you have referrals, as it says in the top right-hand corner, where people are referred by their GP, local GPs, or their social prescribing link workers into the community, in this instance into parks, as a way of improving their mental health and well-being. So what we did, we piloted the approach in 2 of our parks, Caledonian Park in Islington and Talaka Gardens in Camden, and just pictured there is Caledonian Park and its clock tower, which has recently been restored. And the key thing about this project, we brought together all sorts of different stakeholders, local branches of HUK, but also organisations such as TCV, the Community Volunteers, and local organisations such as the Garden Classroom, Mind in Camden, obviously a national organisation, their local branch, and also many NHS colleagues, which, if Chris, if you just go on to the next slide, please, are listed here. So we had local GPs. So these are GPs from the practices that are closest to the 2 parks. We also had the social prescribing link workers who are based at those practices and also cover other neighbouring practices as well. We also had the chair of the Friends of Parks groups for one of the parks. We had a lot of community groups, as I just said. The chairs and leads for the clinical commissioning group, local clinical commissioning groups for Camden, Islington, parks teams, public health, absolutely crucial to this, and also the Greater London Authority, who's one of our project funders, and of course DEFRA. We had 3 meetings, co-design meetings, 2 of which were actual meetings, and the other one which was in May, so it's after lockdown had started, and so that was online. And you can see the comments there about how positive people's engagement were. And what really struck me from all these meetings is how enthusiastically people wanted to get involved. They got it with parks. They could see that parks have a great offer in regards to helping to improve people's health, and were very keen to come up with ways of how we could capitalise upon this. And what also really struck me is actually working with the health sector. It's very much felt like you're pushing us an open door, whereas previously my experience has been it's quite difficult to engage with the health sector. You don't know who to go to. You're really conscious that GPs, for example, are really busy with their time, got 101 other things to do. With this one, I was very, very struck with this piece of work about how much health sector colleagues really wanted to, could understand the merits of this programme and really wanted to shape our future work. So Chris, if you, next slide, please. In regard to our outcomes, as part of this work in January this year, we hosted a Cabinet Office National Leadership meeting on green social prescribing, which had people coming from across the country, about 100 people or so, to talk about green social prescribing, primarily in parks, or it might have been just more generally in nature or in national parks, which is very popular, to say, very well attended. What we also found is that social prescribing, to figure out how social prescribing works, is actually a bit of a challenge, is a bit of a maze. And in our 2 boroughs, Camden and Islington, they each works very differently. But we have now a far greater idea of how it works, who to talk to, and how parks can benefit the health can be referred to patients by social prescribing link workers and by GPs as well. And what we have been able to do is, with these cross-sector relationships, so all the partnerships and relationships we've made, which sort of existed previously, but nothing like as extensively or as strong as they do now. We supported a green renewal bid, which was submitted about a month ago with these partners. And also we've been able to support submission of an expression of interest for green social prescribing, which got submitted just the end of last week, the 23rd of October, working with their health sector colleagues. I am absolutely certain neither of those bids would have been submitted if we hadn't done this work. Next slide, please, Chris. So, what we have found from this is that the supply and demand picture for each park is very different. Different organisations to work with, different needs, and what is in each park is different as well. Obviously, all parks are unique in their own way. We've got great insight into how to take things forward, what GPs and the health sector actually want to see, and what we have developed are action plans for those local parks, which are now being activities now being rolled out. And what we would do with the feedback from them, the outcome of there, is that we'll then turn those into borough-wide action plans for green social prescribing across Camden and Islington. So just what we've done there, we've set up activities in the two parks. They started in September, not ideal because it's autumn. Started during the current situation, of course. Starting activities in a pandemic is not ideal at all. But what we have found, we designed those activities with the local GP practice and the social prescribing link worker to really for them to input into what those activities are, because they are referring people to those activities. And again, it's been a very positive partnership, great input, great that the local GP and social prescribing link worker have given up the time to do that. And so those activities will finish next month in November. And then what we are completing health forms for everybody who's attended there. And we want to see, hopefully, that how people's health has been affected, hopefully improved by participating in those activities. We also want to look at the referral process. Did it work well? And we also want to look at actually what was it like for the deliverers? Was it straightforward to deliver activities in the current situation, and to take that learning so we can expand this work elsewhere? Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. So it's great to see the development of social prescribing in parks. It's something that we've talked about, I think, over a number of years and seen the potential of it. I suppose my first question was about money, sort of unsurprisingly. So I think lots of people have recognised the value of parks for health and well-being, and social prescribing puts that into practice. But do you see a way that this can become financially sustainable for park services and for the NHS?
Yes, good question. Obviously, it is a major thing about money. Obviously, the activities that we are providing, there is a cost to it, of course. And when those activities that end and the funding therefore will have stopped, obviously I really want to see those activities to continue. For a lot of these activities, this will be happening in different ways. For example, we have a health walk, which is actually being delivered by a social prescribing link worker in Talaka Gardens. And so when the 10 weeks are up for the duration of the activity, actually what has happened is that people who've been attending that session, a couple of people have been trained up to help deliver health walks themselves in the future. And I'm sure what will happen there with the social prescribing link worker, who very much gets the benefits of doing that health walk, those health walks will continue with both herself doing it and also the actual participants who've been trained up to lead health walks themselves. With other activities, in Caledonian Park, for example, we have a gardening activity taking place. And what the Friends of Parks, of Friends of Caledonian Park, have said, that they are really keen for people who attend that activity, once the activity finishes, is to engage with them, with Friends of Friends of Caledonian Park, because they have regular weekly activities in which they are doing gardening in Caledonian Park. So you're using the existing Friends group there to continue activities as well. Some of the organisations, they're also delivering activities anyway in other parks, and such as TCV, who do conservation volunteers, who do green gyms, nature conservation, and they're doing that in Talaca Gardens. That is a possibility that they could be absorbed, people who participate there could be absorbed into the existing activities being done in other parks by TCV. Otherwise, it's a question of, are there funding opportunities, and certainly could money be found from elsewhere to continue activity? And obviously what we'd hopefully be able to show with hopefully the success of the activities, I'm saying that because the activities haven't finished yet, they're about halfway through, then there's a good case to say to funders, look, this has worked, we only did it for 10 weeks, but now we want to do a more long-term basis. So yeah, so there's a number of different ways to say that we're looking to sustain these activities.
Great, thank you. I suppose following on from that, and you've spoken about friends groups and existing volunteers, do you think social prescribing has actually been a way to sort of broaden and deepen involvement in those existing activities? Because often, you know, parks volunteering can rely on sometimes a small number of sort of very dedicated volunteers who kind of organise a lot of the activities, and one of the worries with social prescribing might be that it puts more pressure on them, but it sounds like you've managed to get new volunteers involved.
Yes, good question. Very much so. With our projects overall, we are engaging with Friends of Parks groups as a way of improving people's health, and we've had very positive engagement for our Friends of Parks groups, and so who know about the project too, and what we're exploring with them, how this is an opportunity for them to expand their groups, and many of those groups are very interested in expanding the number who are members of that friends group. So with the green social prescribing activities, there's an opportunity for people who've been part of those activities, who they hopefully we will then see, for some of them, they will then participate in that Friends of Parks group. It'll be their local park, and that park group will be doing activities that people will be interested in doing. So, and potentially what we're looking at, it could be training, certainly support, could be training for those Friends of Parks groups, because helping Friends of Parks groups, do they feel that they have the capacity to deal with people who have health problems? Well, they may feel they do not, in which case, let's see, it could be therefore there's a training need. So let's see if we can meet that training need. So Friends of Parks groups feel welcome about people joining them who have health problems, who otherwise, for Friends of Parks groups, rightly or wrongly, might be fearful of being a bit challenging. So we're keen to get their support, their involvement, and where necessary, to give them support and to give them training as well.
Thank you. And have you, I suppose, as parks start to, or maybe just formalise the way that they play a role around health and well-being, have you noticed any changes from sort of parks managers in how they think about parks or make decisions about the sort of facilities or the management of parks more generally?
Very much a work in progress. Something that is absolutely central to our projects is more generally for green, not just for green social prescribing, but the overall project of Parks for Health, is that we do actually change how we manage our parks so that they are more active and more outward looking. That it could be, for example, that you would have outreach work taking place by our park staff to really engage with communities and community organisations to bring people into parks. That's one idea. But it is something that we really want to see in place by the time our project ends, which is March 2022, so sometime yet, where we will have had a change in regard to our park staff and the way that our parks are managed. We have a name for it, we call it workforce transformation, so that our parks are far more outward looking instead of hiding in plain sight, and are far more engaged with the health sector, far more engaged with people, far better at communicating what's in our parks, far more inclusive in the work that they do. So absolutely key for our project. And what we're starting to see with our green social prescribing work is that emerging. It's so, for example, something that came out of our green social prescribing work is that doctors were talking about, we want to know more about what's happening in parks. Who do we contact? How do we find that out, that information? So, for example, we've talked about, I mean, this is all to be decided, but some of the ideas have been knocking about. Okay, well, why don't we have open days for health sector colleagues, health sector professionals to come to a park, to be shown around the park, see what its facilities are, to meet the person or the people who run that park, the activities that may be taking that place in that park, so they have a name. It's as a basis of this in some ways, so they have a named person to contact, they have their contact details, that there is a website which is obviously kept up to date, which says to health sector professionals how they can engage in their local park. And or maybe that sometimes parks, the health sector could be providing activities within the park. If a park has a park building, so could health checks be done in that park building? And then obviously that's introducing health sector staff to that park and that park building, but also more to the point is introducing them, their patients, or to us, our public, into parks who may not have known about that park before, or the extent of what it has.
And I suppose for some people listening to this, they're probably thinking that Camden and Islington are quite far ahead on this, and you're kind of, pushing the boundaries and doing the thinking on this. If this seems quite far away for people, if actually they're not engaged with health services and they don't have this kind of range of activities in their parks, what would be the first steps? What would you sort of recommend as kind of the sort of quick wins or first steps that people can pursue in order to start seeing their parks in this way?
So first of all, 2 or 3 things really. First of all, be better about promoting what's in your park. Be better, be it for the public generally, for stakeholders, the health sector. Be better. Do you have a park notice board? As basic question as that. Is it up to date? If you do, is the information up to date? What's on there? How are you getting it? Do you have a website where people can find out what's happening in the park? If it's a council website, well, is the information good enough on there? Would you, as a member of the public, feel that you were satisfied by going to that park, or the notice boards, the signage, the website? Would that tell you what you think, what you actually know is going on in that park? The other thing that I'd then do is really talk to your health sector colleagues. Talk to, be it if you know of local GPs, particularly GPs who may be really interested in this work, engage with them, find out from them what they think about their park, if the local park, if they have any view on it at all, and if there's a deficit, if they don't know much about that park, well, address that, bring them up to speed in some of the ways I described in the answers to the previous question. If that is successful, and hopefully it would be, use that as a way of saying, okay, in such and such a park, it's been very good with our promotion, with our engagement with the local GP, and then use that as a way to then take to other parks, for other GPs. Say, well, it's worked well here, the engagement we've done, we now want to do the same with you. And learn from us, because obviously part of our project is about sharing our learning. Obviously I'm doing that now, but more long term, that's something once our project is concluded, as the project goes on, and once it's concluded, we want to share our learning so others do not have to reinvent the wheel. They can then take from us what we have learned and then adapt it to their own situation.
Great, thank you, John. That's really helpful. It's really good to have heard about the project. It's great that you're sharing what you're doing, giving people practical information that they can take away and implement in their areas. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to hearing more as the project progresses. Thank you very much.
More than happy. Thanks very much, Chris.